Hi, welcome to today's webinar, Mosquito Management, brought to you by Landscape Management and Pest Management Professional Magazine and our sponsor of the event, FMC. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. You are currently in a listen-only mode. A recording of this webinar will be posted to mypmp.net/webinars and landscapemanagement.net/webinars and will also be emailed to you tomorrow. At this time, I'd like to acquaint you with the ways in which you can participate during today's presentation. Please notice the Q&A panel at the left-hand side of your console. If you have a question, type it in the panel's text box, then click Submit to place your question in queue. We encourage you to ask and enter any questions you may have for our speakers during the presentation. We will address these questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A portion. Questions submitted during registration have already gone to our panelists and may be covered during the presentation. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, you may use the same Q&A panel on your screen to submit your issue, and I or technical support producer Joey Ciccolini will personally assist you. You may learn more about our speakers by viewing their photo, bio, and email address in the panel located on the upper left-hand side of your console. If you are logged into your social media accounts, you can share the webinar's title, description, and URL with your friends or colleagues using the Share This widget you'll see in the bottom left corner of the screen. Finally, at the bottom right of the console, you will find a PDF of today's presentation slides, which you can download, and a link to visit the FMC website. I'm Aurora Harris, Content Marketing Producer for Landscape Management and Pest Management Professional Magazine, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Now, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Today, we will be hearing from Brian Mount, MSBCE. Brian is FMC's Technical Service Manager for all insects nationwide. Over the years, Brian has worked in a number of different management positions in the pest control industry. Later on, we will also be hearing from Evan Parenti, FMC's Golf and Lawn Market Manager. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Aurora. Appreciate the introduction. So we'll go ahead and get started here today. As Aurora had mentioned, today's talk will be on mosquito management, and we'll go over a little bit of the biology and control. As for contents today, we will do a quick little safety slide. This is something that FMC does with all of their presentations. We'll look at the life cycle of mosquitoes, some of their behaviors and distribution, and a little bit on mosquito management as well. And then I will actually turn it over to Evan Parenti, who will present a few slides on some of the FMC programs. So our quick safety share today, spring is coming. It'll be here before we know it. And ensure that you check your mowing and trimming equipment. Make sure blades are sharpened on any mowers or cutting tools. Check your oil levels in motorized equipment. Check tires for air pressure. And also if there's any dry rot or punctures on any of the tires. Lube all necessary fittings and parts. Use a ladder. Check the ladder for any damage or worn out parts as well. Then also check your work area for debris that may have accumulated over the winter months. You don't want to hit a rock or some other debris with a mower, send that flying to damage something, hurt someone. So that's a quick safety share. Just kind of keep that top of mind as you go out there and begin your spring work. So on to mosquitoes. So mosquitoes, general life cycle, basically the adults lay their eggs on water or in water. The eggs hatch into a larval stage, turn into a pupa stage, then emerge as adults and start the whole thing all over again. This process can take anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks, just depending on conditions. And remember, the immature stages are aquatic, so they do need water to develop. That'll be important as we go throughout the time. So here's just a quick example. This is a Culex mosquito laying an egg raft on the water. So it kind of gives you an idea of what they look like. They can be whitish in color. They will darken, over time. But if you have a body of water, be it, a small pond or a bird bath or something like that, when you see these egg rafts floating, just beware that they are mosquito eggs in that body of water. The larval stage, they kind of look like these little small, we call them wigglers, so they do wiggle around quite a bit, and you will see them moving around in the water if they're present. And if you look or look over the top of that water source, a lot of times they'll kind of move down to the bottom area, get out of the way of your shadow for the most part. The pupa stage, this one does kind of hang out towards the surface, and they tend to also move if you disturb it. So looking at some of the breeding sites, so as far as anything that holds water is a potential breeding site for mosquitoes. And you can see in the pictures here, could be anything such as a tarp on the ground. Old tires are probably the #1 cryptic breeding site for mosquitoes. They hold enough water for mosquitoes to go through their life cycle, and there's a lot of them out there. So there are tires pretty much everywhere. Things like wheelbarrows, any small bowls or containers outside, any kind of jars that are left outdoors that can collect water, do provide enough of an area for mosquitoes to develop in. Looking at some more maybe traditional types of breeding areas, so areas along the edges of bodies of water that may flood when there's heavier rains. Again, enough area here for mosquitoes to breed in. And some mosquitoes don't care if it's really stagnant water. If it's water that's mildly or moderately polluted, still could be enough for them to breed in and develop into adult mosquitoes. So again, we talked about these little jars and things like that around a property. This is why it does make it a little bit difficult sometimes to get some of the control you're looking for if you're not also looking for these breeding sites, and really just cleaning them up, emptying out the water, having, say, the homeowner, work with you. Some of these cases, if they have a lot of this type of material on their property, at least have that conversation that they need to remove it. So again, looking at breeding sites, so really anything that retains water can be a possible breeding site. Old tires, gutters that are clogged, can hold enough water to allow mosquitoes to reproduce. So sometimes you don't look up like that and think about those clogged gutters, but there will be enough water up there, and simply cleaning those out and allowing the water to drain would be enough to prevent them from being able to breed up in those types of areas. But one area, this one's kind of interesting, but I was away on vacation about 3 weeks ago. We were gone for a week, came back to our home. I live down in Florida, so mosquitoes are prevalent right now. My daughter went into our downstairs bathroom. We had left the toilet seat up. A female mosquito must have gotten into the house. And sure enough, there were a lot of those wiggler stage mosquitoes actually in the toilet. So she found a spot. So again, they can breed almost anywhere, and sometimes you don't think of certain types of areas where they can breed. That was a first for me to see something like that, but again, it just shows you how adaptive they are and how they can really find those areas that will help them breed and survive. So some quick facts on mosquitoes. There are about 3,000 different species in the world. The males do not bite animals or humans. Females do. And they do that because they need that blood meal and that protein to produce their eggs. Both males and females will feed on nectar for energy, so they will get that quick energy shot from that sugary nectar, and again, gives them that initial burst of energy that they need. They are attracted to CO2 from 100 to 150 feet away. Then as they get closer to that source, they can then hone in on other things such as different skin chemicals, pheromones, pheromones, things like that. And they can bite you. They use a proboscis to do that, to puncture the skin. And mosquitoes, as we know, can transmit diseases. A lot of those diseases are, very harsh to people. They can cause death. And, malaria is something that kills millions of people every year. It is a mosquito-borne disease. So looking at some of the different types of mosquitoes that you may encounter. So these are the culex. So you have the pipiens and the fasciitis. So these are your northern and southern house mosquitoes. Kind of a dull gray in appearance. So not very spectacular looking. But what they do, so we saw the picture of the rafts, the egg rafts. That was from a culex, so they do lay their eggs in rafts. And it's a good way to maybe identify or help identify which species you're dealing with. And kind of as we go through some of these different types of mosquitoes, we will see different characteristics that they have that will help you in your treatment programs as well. So these guys, they will lay those eggs in temporary groundwater. Again, it can be mildly to grossly polluted water, so they really don't care from that standpoint. They can also lay eggs in artificial containers, cans, tires, some of the things we already looked at. The larvae do tend to stay vertical in the water, perpendicular to the surface. The adults rest with their body flat to the surface. And probably more importantly here, they do feed high up in the canopy. So these guys will feed and rest 15 to 25 feet up. So when you think about a mosquito treatment and how you're treating, under eaves around a structure, maybe treating some of that foliage down at ground level, these guys will rest up higher than that. So, if you're dealing with culex, you may need to focus a little bit higher up, really gain good control. They're also a West Nile vector. Kind of makes sense because part of the West Nile development is using birds. So these guys feed up in the trees, and they do feed on birds. So, again, they're going to be up higher in that canopy. This gives you an idea of kind of the numbers and where the culex do truly rest and where they're found. This was a study done by CDC, and they looked at putting out traps and finding where the most culex were found. And you can see up higher in the tree canopy, they trapped about 840 mosquitoes over the course of the study, which was only about a day or so. Down at ground level, only came up with about 31. So, again, these guys up higher in the canopy. One of the important reasons why you need to kind of know which mosquito species you're. So looking at the distribution of culex, you can see they're pretty much throughout the United States. There are several different species, though, throughout the world. And, again, they are here, and they are pretty prevalent throughout the entire U.S. So moving on to Aedes aegypti. This one is also called the yellow fever mosquito. This one's also a Zika virus vector that was hot in the news several years ago, especially down here in Florida. But if you look at this one of the distinguishing characteristics is really on the thorax here. It kind of has like a violin or a banjo type marking, so 2 white lines, 2 curved lines. Kind of looks like maybe a guitar or banjo. With Aedes aegypti, the eggs are deposited in artificial containers, so these guys don't look for that fresh water source. They do deposit it directly into the water on the surface. They do pass winter in the egg stage, so these guys can winter over as the egg stage. But parts of the country where they're active all year long, such as in the South, especially again down in Florida, they're active all year long. They really don't winter over at all. Their eggs can remain viable for up to a year. And these guys, again, they like to get into those artificial areas, so tree holes are a big one. And then those artificial containers, tires, things like that are where they really like to breed. So with Aedes aegypti, the adult females are very wary how they feed. They often attack, around the ankle, so low down on the body. Even can crawl under the clothing and find a good spot to feed, especially if you're out there just resting, say on your back patio. They may just crawl up under your pant leg and bite you bite you there. They do tend to feed in the shade during the daytime. So again, good indicator that you're dealing with Aedes is that they are a daytime biter or daytime feeder. They do prefer to feed on humans over other animals, and they will come indoors. They're not afraid to do that. And typically, these guys really don't move more than maybe a few hundred feet from where they hatched out of. So they do stay pretty close to those breeding sources. So again, always be on the lookout for anything that can hold water where these guys could breed. Looking at some of the distribution, so Aedes aegypti definitely in the southern and eastern United States. I'll show another slide which is a little bit more updated than this one. I believe it's 2017, which does show a little bit wider range for the Aedes aegypti. So moving on to Aedes albopictus. This is your Asian tiger mosquito. And a difference between this one and Aedes aegypti is really this front of the thorax here, just kind of a single white line there. So again, the aegypti kind of had like that banjo type marking, where Aedes albopictus does not. So these guys, again, they do like to deposit their eggs, in artificial breeding sites. They also pass through the winter in the egg stage. This one, again, it likes those artificial sites, so it is considered a domestic species. And we've talked about the old tires, the tree holes, any can or bottle or jar outside that'll hold water is enough for these guys to breed. So again, this one's a very persistent daytime biter. So when you look at, Aedes species, they do bite during the day. So if your customer says, hey, I'm getting sore up during the daytime, they're probably dealing with one of the Aedes. This one, has been somewhat successful in replacing Aedes aegypti throughout its range. So again, a little bit more persistent than aegypti. So it has moved aegypti away from some of those traditional areas where it was found along the East Coast. But aegypti, definitely still are there. This one is a little bit, shy as far as biting. It is sensitive to movements by the host, and it may bite many times over a short period of time. They do like to bite below the waist. So again, another key to maybe identifying that you're dealing with Aedes. And then this one also spends a lot of time resting in lower vegetation, out around the landscape. So if you know you have Aedes species that you're dealing with, that lower vegetation is where you want to focus your treatment. So this one does show, again, a little bit more recent survey of where the different species are found as far as Aedes aegypti and albopictus. And you can see they're mainly eastern U.S. and then up the West Coast and down on the Gulf Coast. So again, pretty prevalent here in the So Anopheles, again, a little bit different here. This one does rest with its body kind of at this discrete angle from a surface. So if you see them resting and they have this little, maybe a 45 or 50 degree angle to the surface, a good way to tell that it is a Anopheles. These guys, are your malaria vector. They do have their abdomen at that discrete angle to the surface. Females deposit eggs individually, on the surface of the water. So this is different than Culex, which, did the egg raft. So these are individual eggs, and they do like fresh water. So these guys won't be, in that polluted water or some of those other more cryptic breeding sites. So you like the freshwater streams, ponds, lakes with aquatic vegetation in them. So again, a little bit different than we saw on the other species. Their eggs also have small floats on either side, so that is unique. If you see that, pretty sure that it is an Anopheles species. They cannot survive drying out or desiccation, which kind of makes sense that they don't want to breed in some of those temporary water sources, because if it dries up, they're not going to be able to survive. Let's see. So with these guys, they do overwinter as adult females. colder climates. The overwintering adults like to get into sheltered areas, so they'll get into any kind of outbuildings, barns, tree holes, other areas that are dark, protected areas. And these guys like to feed at dusk and dawn. So again, different than the Aedes, which were daytime feeders. These are more that evening and maybe morning type feeders. Again, they are a malaria vector, and luckily we have eradicated malaria for the most part from the U.S., but we do still have Anopheles species here. So this gives a quick look at where they're located. You can see in the U.S., so most of the eastern U.S., up the west coast, there's a couple different species there, but they are very prevalent here as well. So when looking at a couple of the different species, important attributes here, whether or not they're a daytime or a nighttime or dusk and dawn type feeder, can help you to identify which species you're dealing with, and that in turn can then help you identify maybe where to focus treatment or where to look for breeding sites, things like that. So moving on to mosquito management, lots of different things here that you can do. But looking at really adult mosquitoes, for the most part here, obviously you'd use an adulticide to go out and hit some of those resting areas, around a home, around a structure. And those areas are things like, up under the eaves, under the gutter areas. Any area that's shady, protected, cool, are areas where mosquitoes are going to like to hang out. So any of the foliage around the property, potentially up to as high as 25 feet, may need some type of an adulticide treatment. What I'll say, though, about that is just double check with your local licensing rules. Does it allow you to treat up that high into a tree? Are there any other rules in place about that? Also pay special attention, around decks, wooden decks, usually up off the ground, maybe a couple of feet, as high as even the second story of a house. But under those decks, it's shady, it's cool, there's moisture there. There are areas where mosquitoes are going to want to hang out, especially during the daytime. Around pool areas, I put that here because typically there are some plantings, around pools and patios that may require treatment, but just be cautious not to get sprays into pools. Customers won't like that, and it really is not a good practice to do. So just pay attention in those areas. Make sure, again, you're not getting a lot of overspray into areas you don't want it. Always walk the property to identify treatment targets, areas to avoid. Do this prior to starting any kind of an application. So what I mean here is walk around that property. Look for things like fish ponds. Look for things like toys and those types of things in the yard. And I'll put up there, I have a pitfall list, which I'll show here in a couple slides, which really kind of gives you an idea of what those things are. So when doing mosquito control, there are a lot of different types of equipment that you could use. You can use a regular spray rig, right? So if you're a lawn care company, want to get into mosquito control, you likely already have some of the equipment that you're going to need, if not all of it. You can use a backpack sprayer. Backpack mist blowers have become very popular. They do tend to get into foliage maybe a little bit deeper, maybe get on the underside of some of those leaves within that foliage. Not absolutely necessary, but it is another piece of equipment that you may consider if you don't have it and you want to get into doing mosquito control. It also allows you maybe to treat a little bit larger area with less volume going out, so maybe you don't have to refill that backpack as much. Again, and they're very, very good as far as getting control and getting good coverage in thick foliage. So some sample areas for treatment. If you look here, typical home, right? So you got shrubs in here. Might want to treat those. Up under the eaves here, more shrubs, more plantings, over here and here. We have a front porch area here that has a covered, covered area that provides good shade, and places for the mosquitoes to rest. I can attest to that because this is actually my house, and they love to rest up underneath that front door area, which is probably where that one got inside. Be able to, lay some eggs in that bathroom. So, again, shady, cool, damp areas are really what you want to focus on. You go out a little bit further, maybe you find some plantings like this. These are, again, some more shrubs. There's actually a bird bath in here. So some more areas that, may require treatment. They're good areas where mosquitoes are going to rest. And then same thing over here, up along the eaves. There's some shrubs down here as well. So again, areas to focus on. So looking at, mosquito control, there's obviously a lot of products out there. One of our newer ones is our Scion insecticide. So in this trial, we were at the mid-rate, and we looked at it versus a couple of competitive products as well. This one was actually a plant that was treated. They treat the leaves, age them outdoors, and this went out to 60 days. Then they'll pull a leaf off that plant, bring it in, have a mosquito rest on it for about 10 minutes, take it off, and see if it dies. So this goes out to 60 days, and you can see Scion performed very well, still getting 80% control at the mid-rate, out to about 60 days after treatment. This one looked at Aedes aegypti on hardy board siding. For those maybe not familiar with that material, it's kind of like a cement board. There's a couple different grades of it, but basically these were treated, put outdoors for up to 75 days after they were treated. And looking here, you got two different rates, a high rate of Scion and a mid-rate. And basically both of those performed really well. The mid-rate, even performed better than the competitor product here, at least in the up to the 30-minute timing exposure. So, again, we talked about some of those pitfalls, right? So if you're going to go and treat around a home, and this is not just for mosquito treatment, if you're doing perimeter treatments, if you're doing really any other types of treatments, even a lawn care type treatment, look for things like fish ponds, bird baths. Are there pet dishes out there? So is there a bowl of pet food out? Are there pets in the area? Open windows or doors. There could be an open well on the property or a well that's exposed there. There could be toys, whether they're for kids or pets. Look for tripping hazards. And some of my favorites that sometimes get missed are there vegetable or herb gardens on the property? So a lot of times these are planted, near the house. Fortunately, they do get treated from time to time. And most product labels for mosquito control or pest control don't allow treatments of, vegetable or herb gardens. So be cautious of that. Maybe ask the question of the homeowner, because some of those herbs and things like that can look like, weeds or other types of plantings around the structure. It's always good to ask first instead of have to deal with it afterwards. Look for fruit trees as well. Does it have fruit on the tree? Because, again, most products don't allow you to treat a fruit-bearing tree. So, again, these are just some things to help keep you, out of trouble, and really by looking for these types of things and asking these questions of the homeowner, or even asking them to keep these things out of their yard when you're going to treat, it does show that homeowner that you do have concern for them, for their pets. You want to do a good job for them and not, get into a situation where, in some trouble in some sense of the word. So a little bit more on Scion. So Scion insecticide with UVX technology. So it's really, what we consider the next generation of pest control, really engineered to give general insect control for those PMPs or LCOs looking for really long-term reliable performance. Was designed and formulated to really hold up under very harsh conditions. So this is, things like concrete and stucco type siding, and those types of sidings that are very alkaline, and looking at some of those toughest pests as well, things like spiders, ticks, and then allowing really the longest service interval as well. So gamma-sialothrin is the active in Scion. It does provide for really good contact control as well as good continuous residual. The other thing is it does allow for really good control using less active ingredients, so it's a very low use rate pyrethroid. So looking at what is gamma-sialothrin, so compared to the other sialothrin products out there, gamma-sialothrin is synthesized via purified and enhanced raw sialothrin. It is the lowest use rate pyrethroid, and what we can see here, the chart on the bottom left, straight sialothrin is here, and each of these different shades of blue represent different isomers of sialothrin. So the active isomer is this really dark blue, right? When you look at straight sialothrin, it's about 23% of the active isomer. Lambda sialothrin is about 42% of the active isomer. And gamma is about 98% of the active isomer. So you have a lot more of the active portion of the sialothrin chemistry in gamma sialothrin. So therefore, you can use lower use rates. As far as the formulation, again, we talked a little bit about this, but it was designed to hold up on those harsh conditions, get really good control of some very tough pests under those conditions. Some of those things we talked about, the more alkaline surfaces, high UV light, and then also high heat. All of those things or those characteristics tend to break down certain chemistries. So we really designed Scion to hold up under those different chemistries. So really there's 4 components to the formulation. You've got a readily available active ingredient. You've got a defined release active ingredient. You've got UV protection, and you've got that durability under harsh conditions. This is kind of another way to just show that, some different bullet points here, but again, those 4 components to the formulation. So again, Scion, really the new standard for mosquito and perimeter pest control. Looking at the typical use rates, I talked about some of those very, very low rates. And so you're looking at anywhere from 0.16 to 0.65 fluid ounces per gallon or per 1,000 square feet. And at the low rate, you're at a 0.0075% active ingredient, which is very low. You compare that to a tall star, you're at 0.06. This is much, much lower than that. The mid-rate, you're at 0.015%, so about a quarter of what you would be with something like our tall star product. And then at the high rate, you're at 0.03%. So again, pretty low rates overall, and really the lowest as far as pyrethroid. Use sites, so Scion, you do have pretty much all your typical use sites on the label: residential, commercial, perimeter. As far as treatment areas, you do have food handling establishment as well. But you also have lawns, parks, recreation areas, athletic fields, and ornamentals around the residential ornamentals. So your labeled pests, pretty broad label. These are a few highlighted here, but you do have pretty much all your typical things like ants, cockroaches, mosquitoes, spiders, ticks, scorpions. So again, a wide range of pests here that it's very effective on. And again, just looking at a couple quick other data slides. This is Scion versus house spiders. High rate here, lower rate here. And again, this is out to 90 days after treatment. So again, looks really good. Even the mid-rate performed very, very well compared to the higher rates of some other products. Looking at deer ticks, so Scion out to 90 days or so performed very well. Lone Star tick, really the same story. Scion, red bar here, again, just performed really well out to about 90 days after treatment. I really hope to run this trial a lot longer than that, but ticks are very expensive. You have to buy ticks for a trial. One deer tick is about $6, so very expensive to run these, but out to 90 days, again, it performed extremely well. So, with all of that, that's all great. We got great data, got great, testimonials from the field from folks who have been using Scion. But we also kind of, put our money where our mouth is. We do have a 90-day perimeter assurance program for some perimeter pests. So if you treat with Scion at the right rates, we will guarantee you no retreatments for 90 days. If you do get a call back in there, we'll give you the product to clean it up. Similar with mosquitoes, there's a 75-day mosquito assurance program as well. We also just added a tick assurance program. That one, I believe, is also 75 days on ticks. So, again, really good type programs here. Really shows our confidence in the product and what it can do. I think Evan will talk a little bit more about the assurance programs he gets on here. So that's really all I had from a mosquito and Scion standpoint. I'm going to turn it over to Evan Parente, who will talk a little bit more about some of the programs FMC has to offer, and maybe a little bit on some of the assurance programs. So, Evan, I'm going to give it to you.
Thank you, Brian. A lot of great info in there. So my name is Evan Parente, and I am the Golf and Lawn Care Market Manager for FMC. I have a few additional slides and pointers really pertaining to how you, the owner-operator, can maximize your outcomes with mosquito treatments, Scion, and add-on services in general. So basically, if you aren't offering add-on services, and especially mosquito, we highly recommend adopting the service. As in our experience, it's typically been one of the most efficient, cost-effective, and profitable services you can add to your existing offerings. And you already have customers, so why not go straight to them and give the convenience of a one-stop shop that's got a ton of value to the homeowner. And at the same time, we encourage you to utilize these assurances that we publish in that sales process. We stand behind the products and we stand behind you, and we want you to be able to maximize that program to your best benefit. So a few more points here about implementing these add-on services. For example, 75-day assurances were made not just on the great efficacy that you've seen here, but also to align to your service interval and to give you a differentiating option. I mean, from what my experience, a typical LCO is on a 6-week application interval, so that aligns really well to a 75-day service. You have a little bit of leeway in case you have a rainout event or anything like that. And the last bullet here about a proper perimeter keeps the interior safe. Over the pandemic, we found that many operators and applicators were able to get the same great efficacy with pests without having to go inside the house. So you can, go with confidence in that you can offer these services and be able to give the homeowner the results they're looking for, even if you're doing a perimeter and a mosquito. We found products like Scion are able to take care of that need for efficacy without you having to go inside if that's not something you want to offer. So a quick summary of the assurances. So Brian showed the 90-day perimeter and the 75-day mosquito, and also referenced the tick one, which we just released not a few weeks ago. But all three of them here, all based around Scion, and you have a 75-day for 2 key service. I mean, all of these could be their own add-on service, and they're all one product. So it's kind of a one-stop shop, a convenient option for you, and all backed with different assurances. So we also work to make sure that these align with how you would actually apply the product. So the perimeter program is a 90-day program, but it has the 0.65 use rate for a variety of pests that you would treat in a perimeter. And note that also aligns with the mosquito and the tick one are all at the 0.65 use rate. So you can use a single product, mix a single rate, and go. And you can also offer those as 3 different services. So lastly, I just want to make you aware of our FMC True Champions program. This is a program built for you, the owner-operator, to help you grow your business. So all of the assurances can be found on this page, as well as our dynamic rewards program, where we offer rebates on products like Scion, so you can drive down that cost and use for you and add to your profits. So please take a look at www.fmctruechampions.com. You can get all these benefits and everything's listed there. All you need to do is enroll just one time. It's free, easy, and like I said, you only have to do it once. No uploading of invoices or anything like that, and we will start sending you rebates. So that is the conclusion of my slides. So thank you. We appreciate your attendance today, and we look forward to a great year together.
Yep. So
thank you, Evan and Brian. That was great stuff. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Brian. We're just going to roll into our Q&A portion. So we had some questions received during registration, and then we'll answer a couple as well from the presentation. So the first question I have is, does cedar oil work?
Yeah, so good question. And again, hopefully you guys can hear me. I have my phone all the way up, so I apologize if it's a little quiet, but I'll try to talk a little louder here. So cedar oil, and really there's a bunch of different plant type oils out there, whether it's clove oil or citronella or lemongrass. So there's a lot of different ones out there. I think they do work okay. You'll get good knockdown, but I don't believe you'll get much residual out of them. So that's probably their biggest shortcoming. You don't get that residual. You'll hit mosquitoes that are there. Sure, it can knock them down. The other concern with some of the oils would just be around temperatures. If you're treating plant material, it's summertime, it's 90 degrees out, and you're spraying oils over ornamentals, just be cautious, I would say, for any kind of phytotoxicity. But yeah, I think they can work, at least initially, but residual-wise, I don't think you're going to get there.
Alrighty, thank you. The next question I have is, how effective are IGRs, and are they worth the money?
Yeah, so IGRs, they're definitely effective against mosquito larvae, at least if the right ones that are labeled for use outdoors. Mixing it into a perimeter mosquito program. So if you were going to add an IGR to your spray, it adds a lot of cost. It almost doubles the cost in most cases. So most IGRs, you're going to get about 14 days of residual outdoors on them. Sunlight is pretty harsh on them. If you're treating around a structure and there's a lot of those, let's say, cryptic breeding areas where you can get some of that IGR into those water sources where they're breeding, I think it can be somewhat effective there. It's going to stop some of those populations from reproducing or from maturing. So yeah, it can help you. There were some studies done years ago that were presented at the American Mosquito Control Association, which tended not to see a great benefit from adding the IGRs. All of my studies that I do, I don't add them, and we get really good control. So it can't hurt you. It could potentially help you, I guess, is the way to answer the question, just depending on the circumstances. But broadly, overall, using it every single time in every treatment, I don't see the added benefit overall.
And then the next question I have is, what is the temperature range that mosquitoes start to breed and lay eggs?
Wow, good question. I'll try to give a good answer. You know, I haven't really looked at that in a while, but I would say once it gets up, you know, it's a little bit of a guess here, but I'm going to say 65, you know, somewhere in that range. But yeah, don't hold me to that one.
And then with that question, this next one I have is, so when treating a backyard and patio areas, should you treat the furniture on the patio, was another question we received.
I mean, they'll definitely, if they're in shady areas, you know, they definitely can rest, you know, under those, you know, they're going to rest underneath, so on the underside. You know, I don't think it's a huge deal to treat it or not. You can definitely treat the underside of it. I wouldn't treat the, you know, the tops. Yeah, it's not going to, I don't think it's going to, you know, sway your treatment really one way or the other unless there's just a heck of a lot of furniture out there. But, you know, a couple just, you know, lounge chairs or things like that. Yeah, I don't think you would need to.
And then another question we have is, on average, will mosquitoes stay in an area such as a backyard, or will they travel further?
Yeah, so they're going to travel to wherever they're going to find their food sources. So, you know, they definitely, you know, can travel, you know, several miles, you know, to look for that source. But, you know, if they're able to feed and reproduce, you know, within a, you know, backyard type area, they're probably going to stay. You know, other mosquitoes can definitely fly in as well, but if they're getting what they need, so they're finding that CO2 trail, they're coming back to, you know, people or pets to feed on. You know, as long as they're getting what they need, they're going to stick around. But again, they can move, you know, several miles away from where they hatched out of.
Perfect. And then we will do 2 more questions. So the next one is, would you need to use a sticker with Scion? And if so, what type of conditions?
Yeah, you don't need to. You know, all of the data, all of the trials I've run are without any kind of a sticker. So, you know, again, and depending on which ones you're using, you know, you got to just watch for phyto. You just don't want to get a too high a percentage in the tank, but really you don't need it. I would say, you know, if you have very, very heavy, you know, vegetation, and let's say you've treated and you're not seeing the control that you think you should, maybe you didn't get good coverage, potentially then you would maybe think about something like that. But, you know, the data I've seen, you don't need it.
All right. And then our last question of the day before wrapping up is, can you use Scion in a Clark brand ULV machine?
Yeah, I saw that question on there. So I'm thinking this is referring to more of like a truck-mounted type ULV application. I would say at this point the label may not allow that. I'd have to go back and just do a little bit more digging on it, but really not designed for something like a mosquito district to use, you know, in those types of machines at this point. You just have to watch that particle size. You don't want it to be too small, and usually that's going to be below about 50 microns because if it gets real small, it can travel maybe some areas where you don't want it to go, such as a body of water, which wouldn't be good. So that one, you know, whoever sent that in, you know, they can definitely send me an email, and I can look into that further. But I would say at this time, no, if that's the type of equipment they're talking about. That I'm pretty sure it is.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you all for sharing these insights with us. We're going to wrap up now, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending. We appreciate your time. Before we wrap up, I'd like to go over a few closing remarks. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Mosquito Management, brought to you by Landscape Management and Pest Management Professional Magazine and our sponsor of the event, FMC. If we were not able to answer your questions during the presentations or Q&A session, your questions will be forwarded to the panelists to be addressed via email. If you have any additional questions for myself or our speakers, you can reach out to us directly via the email addresses you see on the slide. The resources panel houses a PDF of today's presentation slides, which you can download. To access this panel, click the green icon at the far right end of the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. A recording of this webinar will be emailed to you tomorrow and posted to landscapemanagement.net/webinars and mypmp.net/webinars. Upcoming webinars from Landscape Management and Pest Management Professional Magazine also will be posted to that page. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you'll join us for another great webinar.